Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight is September 15th, 2016, and we're going to discuss a lot of information. We have both important information in terms of the foreign policy issue and the domestic policy issue. Of course, the foreign policy we're going to be discussing is the Syrian crisis, which has been exacerbated by the invasion of Syria by Turkey. So we're going to discuss that. We're also going to discuss the domestic issues at hand, at least one of them, which is the DEA ban of kratom. We're going to talk about a recent travesty of the pesticide industry killing millions of bees here in South Carolina. And we're going to, of course, at least in the area of kratom, we're going to talk about what we can do. We have concrete strategy points, action points, in order to fight this ban, and we're going to go into why that's important and so forth. We're also going to talk about a number of other domestic issues because we are now engaged in the fight nationwide, indeed worldwide, and we're going to direct our efforts in that way. So let's take a look first at foreign policy. But before I do, I should give the site a plug. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are interested in hearing Truth on the Tracks every week, it's aired Monday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here at ucy.tv. You can access the show's personal website, ucy.tv/TT, for Truth on the Tracks. You'll find the archives there, the links to my articles. A chat room is available at UCY as well if you're into that. So all of that stuff is available. Now, my articles, follow them, activistpost.com, naturalblaze.com, eraofwisdom.org. You can follow them in a number of different places, but of course, if you're interested in my work specifically, then I highly encourage you to go to brandonturbeville.com. That's the website where I repost all of my articles, all of the YouTube videos, all the archive versions of this show, all the interviews. There is the Twitter feed there as well, a list of recommended sites. You can translate the site into virtually every language if you like with the click of a button. You can donate there. You can also get a copy of the difference it makes, 36 Reasons Why Hillary Clinton Should Never Be President, which is a book by me written about Hillary Clinton trying to prevent this wretched witch from ever becoming president. And this was written even before the primary, so we're hoping we can at least prevent her from ascending to the presidency. That book is free. You can buy it in hard copy form. You can buy it off Amazon. You can buy it off the site. But this is free online in a PDF form, so please take advantage of that. And, of course, you can find the books there at the website as well. Now, before, again, we get into the details, I want to point out that we have new features on the website. And because I put out a call a few weeks ago for individuals to get active in a number of different ways, I got a response that was much bigger than I had expected. And it took quite some time to actually get back in touch with everybody. And we've discussed these issues here on the show in terms of what we want to do, the action plan, strategy, and so forth. But we've got a new plan, a new feature being set up for the website, and this is the action alert and the strategy points that are going to be posted on the website as needed. So whenever there's an issue, and take the ban on kratom, for instance, that needs action, we will be posting action alerts on the website. And it's just going to be posted as if it were an article. So they'll be just like a regular article, but you'll see it'll say action alert. Generally, it'll have the issue of which we're talking about listed and the date. It'll briefly explain the issue and what you can and need to do, and a number of steps, and hopefully those steps will be accompanied by links. All that stuff will be there. Now, in terms of strategy points, this will be something, it'll be posted in a similar fashion, but it's also going to be a kind of a guiding document which shows us where we're trying to go in the weeks and months ahead. So we will have strategy points coming out for the elections, the November elections, which we have some headway on. There will be, of course, the presidential election Senate elections, House elections, and local elections, and so forth. So we'll post information related to elections that we should be paying attention to. Now, I will not endorse candidates, but I will highlight candidates that may exhibit some of our guiding principles more so than the traditional candidates. So we're not going to be looking at necessarily all the races, just where candidates might step out in front above the others. So economics or civil liberties or something, we will try to give them an honorable mention so people in those areas can pay attention. And of course, there's going to be a marijuana referendum in a number of different states. We'll try to mention that as well. And those will be in the form of strategy points. And then, of course, action alerts will be stuff that you need to take action on immediately. And of course, those of you who have contacted me will have the ability to access that, as well as the general public and general readers. Now, let's look over at the foreign policy issue. The Yemeni situation, we've discussed this in brief, but I guess I should just mention this before we get into Syria. We have the Yemeni Republican forces, that is the fighters that are loyal to the former President Saleh, as well as Houthi fighters, have yet again struck a major blow to Saudi Arabia inside Saudi Arabia. They have, after a string of territory and military bases inside Saudi Arabia that were seized by the Houthis, particularly in the Najran province, the fighters have now seized several Saudi military posts in the Azir province. In addition to that, the Houthis have managed to capture a large cache of American and Canadian weapons that belong to the Saudi military. They are continuing to march forward in the Najran Valley as well, moving closer toward the provincial capital. This is now part of a trend. The Saudis continue to bomb and destroy Yemen, but the Houthis are quietly not only resisting them inside Yemen, but have launched massive counterattacks inside Saudi Arabia, going up to around 10 miles or so into the country, seizing military bases and strategic areas, now closing in on provincial capitals. The Houthis are, of course, making the Saudis quake in fear, because this is now revealing Saudis are nothing more than paper tigers in terms of the military. Now, in keeping with the crisis in Syria, we have French President Hollande, who's not only pushed the knife further into the heart of the French economy and made certain that there's no trace of freedom that's going to remain in France, is now criticizing Turkey for its action against Kurdish fanatics and Western-backed Kurdish militias in Syria. And in addition to that, Hollande is warning Russia not to become a protagonist in the war. Hollande's words, he said that, quote, multiple contradictory interventions carry the risk of a general inflammation. He also said that Russia needs to be a player in negotiations, not a protagonist in the action. He also said that Russia should join the alleged anti-ISIL coalition led by the U.S. Now, Hollande has been fine with Turkey supporting ISIS and other Western-backed terrorists on its soil since the beginning of the crisis. Only when it comes to attacking Western-backed Kurds, who are obviously being used to federalize Syria, is Hollande willing to issue warnings to Turkey. The issue for Hollande is clearly not a violation of Syrian national sovereignty or international law. It's going beyond the marching orders given to Turkey by the NATO powers regarding a safe zone in northern Syria. That's the crime, according to Hollande. And as for Russia, Hollande's misuse of the word protagonist notwithstanding, the message is simple: stop fighting terrorism in Syria. Do as you're told. Right? That's the message coming from France. Hollande is literally warning the Russians that they should stop their military operations and follow orders given by the U.S.-led coalition, who are now apparently the arbiters of all that is just and legal in the world. Now, while Hollande is likely to be taken as seriously by Erdogan as he was by Assad and every other national leader in the world, his statements nonetheless reveal a staggering level of bravado and arrogance for the president of a country that's teetering on the edge of obscurity and collapse. For its part, Turkey has refused to buckle to at least the public statements of the United States. We have Ömer Çelik stating that, quote, "No one has the right to tell us which terrorist organization we can fight against," end quote. So it's not likely that the addition of Holland to the pile is going to make any further difference in the Turkish position. Despite the public disagreement, Turkey has sent every signal possible to announce that they intend to stick with the NATO line of destroying Bashar al-Assad and replacing his government with that of one that's beholden and favorable to Washington and the Anglo-American oligarchy. A buffer zone, or a no-fly zone, of course, is tantamount to war and an open military assault against the sovereign secular government of Syria, because the implementation of a no-fly zone would require airstrikes against Assad's air defense systems. And we're going to talk about that more in detail in terms of the Turkish invasion. Turkey is now deepening its push into Syrian territory. We have now, with the result of that, we have numerous geopolitical interests that are colliding with one another. What appears to be a war that is now worthy of the reputation the Middle East has for political and geopolitical complexity. Having had its immediate expedition across the Turkey-Syria border condemned by the Syrian government, that Turkey is now facing some public criticism from the United States in regards to its military efforts against Kurdish forces who are east of the Euphrates. The Kurdish forces, of course, are themselves aligned with the United States, particularly against ISIS and the Syrian government, as well as staunch enemies of the Turkish government. The United States is stating publicly, although we can say that public statements don't always mirror behind-the-scenes agendas, that fighting between Turkey and Turk-supported rebels, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, FSA, Kurdish forces also, it's unacceptable and that clashes must stop. We have the U.S. envoy to the anti-ISIS coalition, Brett McGurk, stating that fighting in areas where ISIS was not present is a source of deep concern. We have BBC saying Turkish forces have attacked what they say are Kurdish terrorists since the crossing of the border last week, but the Kurdish YPG militia says Turkey just wants to occupy Syrian territory. Ankara says it aims to push both ISIS and Kurdish fighters away from its border. Turkish forces and allied factions of the rebel Free Syrian Army forced out ISIS out of the Syrian border city of Jarablus on Tuesday and have since pounded neighboring villages held by Kurdish-led U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces. Turkish military carried out 61 artillery strikes against Jarablus over the past 24 hours. Reuters news agency reported on Monday. Turkey has insisted Kurdish militia, which it regards as terrorists, retreat east across the Euphrates River. Now, for Turkey's part, they have refused to buckle to the public statements of the United States. And we just went over this, right? That Ömer Çelik saying they have the right to determine which terrorist organizations they can fight against. We also have Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu stating that the YPG is attempting to seize territory where Kurds have not had a tradition of making up a large ethnic bloc. And that, at least, is undeniably true. Cavusoglu says, quote, the YPG is engaged in ethnic cleansing. They are placing who they want to in those places, end quote. The YPG is denying that its forces were west of the Euphrates. They're responding by saying that the Turks really want a pretext to annex Syrian land. Of course, that is possibly true, right? For both sides. The YPG, the Kurds, have indeed made a number of attacks against various ethnic groups, religious groups. They are clearly fanatics, and they have, whether you call it ethnic cleansing, they have ethnically cleansed a number of villages. And of course, Turkish interests do lie in seizing more Syrian territory. So there's some truth to both of these things. Now, we have Turkish-backed forces advancing on Manbij, which is a city about 20 miles south of Turkey's border that was captured this month by the SDF with U.S. help. The Turkish military said that it was also shifting operations westward, which would take it into territory that's still under ISIS control. this is also moving toward, again, more Kurdish forces. We have sources on the ground inside Ain al-Arab, which is Kobani, that are reporting that the Turkish military has reached the outskirts of that city, and claims that are now being made that the Turks are considering building a wall to separate the two countries, sort of a Donald Trump policy there. But this is coming from sources, it's nothing that was said publicly. Now, the question becomes, what is Turkey doing? The Turkish invasion is predicated on the basis of fighting ISIS, and that is an unbelievable goal since Turkey has been supporting, training, and facilitating ISIS since day one. Not only that, but Turkey is arriving in Syria with terrorists in tow. The BBC reported, remember, that between 9 and 12 tanks crossed the frontier, followed by pickup trucks believed to be carrying hundreds of fighters from what they refer to as Turkish-backed factions of the rebel Free Syrian Army. So if Turkey was interested in stopping terrorism, why would they lead the charge for more terrorists to enter Syria? If stopping terrorism was truly Turkey's goal, it's capable of sealing the border from its own side without any need for invasion. So why the big war party here? Turkey's interests do not lie in stopping terrorism. Far from it. Turkey's foreign policy and military decision to invade Syria are based along three lines. It's the desire for more territory, which it believes was stolen from it a long time ago. Its willingness to continue working with NATO in the attempt to destroy the secular government of Syria, and its concern over the Kurdish expansion. Now, with this invasion, Turkey has solidified its willingness to risk outright war with Syria, and perhaps even Russia, in order to fulfill the goals of NATO and Anglo-American powers that have sought to destroy Syria from the beginning. And part of this strategy is the creation of buffer zones and safe zones in the north, precisely the concepts that were refloated and discussed by the United States and the UK only days before the invasion. Note that the invasion and the operations are centering around Jarablus, which is the eastern border of this famed Jarablus corridor, which, bordered by Afrin and Azaz in the west, make up the last fully functioning terrorist supply routes coming in from Turkey. These were precisely the dimensions that were discussed by Western think tanks and NGOs in regards to what a safe zone in Syria should look like. Although they argued on the basis of giving civilians somewhere to go, the zones were supposed to be controlled by moderate Western-backed terrorists, right? The moderate cannibals. And they were clearly designed to prevent the Syrian government and Russian forces from closing supply routes coming from the Turkish side of the border into Syria. This safe haven is also a way for the neo-Ottoman Erdogan to lay claim to more territory in order to placate his dream of becoming the 21st century equivalent of the leader of the Turkish Empire. At the very least, this desire for more land under the Turkish flag is going to lead to a situation that's similar to that of the Golan Heights, basically, which Israel has illegally occupied for decades, but there's frequent threat of military action and controversy and conflict all the time. Erdogan is also incredibly concerned about the growing Kurdish movement inside Turkey and in Syria, with the Kurds gaining more and more territory in the north of Syria, in large part because of support being given by the United States, as well as Kurds in Iraq becoming more and more willing to work with the YPG Kurds in Syria. The growing interest of dissent and military operations inside Turkey by the PKK. Erdogan's undoubtedly concerned that the Kurds could decide to unite and initiate a massive campaign for autonomy and independence, or at the very least, inspire Turkish Kurds to launch some type of massive revolution. Now, this question of Kurdistan we've discussed before. The plan to carve out a Kurdistan is taking a violent form in Syria and Iraq. The ability to remove all forces within the borders of what would be called Kurdistan, except for the Kurdish forces, that's been the result of constant U.S. bombing and death squad herding around towns like Ain el-Arab, Kobani, Tal Abyad, and other areas where the Kurds have been able to outline their territory by virtue of military prowess. The U.S. bombing has done nothing but strengthen ISIS, though. Every other location in Syria and Iraq, it's strengthened ISIS, even bombing Syrian infrastructure, Iraqi military forces directly, accidentally airdropping support to ISIS. ISIS has gotten stronger as a result of the U.S. bombing, has not gotten stronger as the result of the Russian bombing and the Syrian military forces, however. But in the Kurdish forces, U.S. bombing seems to be functioning as this primitive and violent method of border shaping that would outline Kurdish territory from the Syrian and Iraqi territories. And increasing ISIS forces in Kobani, or Ain al-Arab, significantly hampers the ability of the Syrian army to respond or to defeat those forces in these specific areas. Cutting off Ain al-Arab from the Syrian army, leaving the Kurdish areas to the devices of the Kurds, as the ISIS forces are beaten back from inside the borders of what would be Kurdistan. Now, leaving the question of the legitimacy of Kurdistan aside for a while, acknowledging the heroism of the Kurds in the fight against ISIS and Nusra and other terrorist forces, it also needs to be noted that the Kurds have found some very unsavory allies in the process. Not only the United States and NATO, but the Free Syrian Army, who are proxy terrorists of the United States and NATO. So, for instance, the United States has been tacitly supporting the Kurdish fighters in Iraq for some time under the pretext of assisting them in their fight against ISIS, despite the fact that the U.S. has armed, trained, funded, facilitated, and directed ISIS from the beginning. The United States has allegedly stopped short of directly arming the Kurds, but has maintained very close ties with them. Some would even argue that, with the exception of the ISIS fighters themselves, the Kurds have more friendly relations with the U.S. than the Iraqi government. And, of course, those arms are not being provided publicly, but they are being provided privately and covertly. The U.S. government has been attempting to pass legislation to directly arm the Kurds as well as Sunni forces in Iraq for some time. In fact, they recently passed part of that legislation formed the National Defense Authorization Act of 2016, although differences in the House and Senate version still have to be worked out, I believe. But the arming of the Kurds directly in Iraq, along with the Sunni forces, creates the perception of fully separate and independent principalities, free from the control of the Iraqi central government, leading up to the breakup of the country as a whole into three separate entities: a Kurdish segment, Sunni segment, Shiite segment. In fact, a plan like this has been in the works for Iraq, and if the U.S. continues its support for Kurds in Syria, the situation is ripe for the appearance of a Kurdistan entity across the borders of Iraq and Syria. Indeed, much like the plan to break up Iraq into three separate parts, a similar plan was devised for Syria in the absence of total destruction, the same type that happened to Libya. The question of accepting arms might easily be explained by gold is where you find it, right? The fact that the YPG is now working directly with the Free Syrian Army, though that's further evidence of collusion between NATO, the U.S., and the YPG. While presented as a moderate organization by the mainstream Western press, we have to point out that the FSA is nothing more than Al-Qaeda, ISIS, al-Nusra. In fact, there's no such thing as a moderate rebel in Syria, and there never has been. The FSA is documented to have committed massive atrocities, and the groups who were armed and funded and directed by the U.S. are intent upon implementing Sharia law on the subjected populations. And I have pointed that out, other researchers have pointed that out and documented it. The FSA is nothing more than a wing of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and has even publicly stated that it was working with the terrorist organizations in the past. The fact that the YPG would be willing to cooperate with the FSA is telling, but the fact that the FSA would be willing to cooperate with the YPG is even more telling. After all, the Iraqi Kurds have long been connected to U.S. intelligence and military operations in the past. With an increase of signs of cooperation between the YPG and their Iraqi counterparts, you can only wonder if the events transpiring on the ground in relation to the Kurds in Syria and Iraq and Turkey are part of an overarching U.S. plan to finally carve out a pound of geographic flesh out of Iraq and Syria. Unfortunately for the Kurds, their history of their community, and the U.S. has been a history of short-term usefulness and treachery. Seldom have the Kurds benefited from supporting the American actions or working in the service of the U.S. geopolitical agendas, whether wittingly or unwittingly. In fact, in almost every single circumstance, the Kurds have provided yeoman service in the name of destabilization and the strategy of tension, but they've been left holding the bag in the end. And that bag is almost always something that contains horrific slaughter and subsequent oppression of the Kurdish people. Now, the legitimacy of a Kurdistan in Syria is disproven easily as a justifiable option. And there are a lot of people out there who are calling for this and arguing that the Kurds deserve some type of autonomy or independence, but I'm sorry, they don't. The region of Al-Hasaka, right, which is the Kurdish Nationalist Party and the military wing, the YPG, have declared a Kurdish federal state. It doesn't have a Kurdish majority. Al-Hasaka Governorate is a mosaic of Assyrian Christians, Armenians, Turkmen, Kurds, Bedouin Arabs. Of the 1.5 million population of Al-Hasaka, only 40% are ethnically Kurdish. And parts of Al-Hasaka, at least Al-Hasaka Governorate, such as the Al-Hasaka District, is less than 15% Kurdish. Among the other large minorities in the area, the Arabs and the Assyrian Christians form a majority. So declaring a small area with a wide array of ethnic groups as belonging to a specific ethnic minority is a recipe for oppression. The Kurdish population of Al-Hasaka has also been heavily infiltrated by illegal Kurdish immigration from Turkey. Kurdish immigration to Syria began in the 1920s and occurred in several waves after multiple failed Kurdish uprisings against Turkey. It continued throughout the century. In 2011, the Kurdish population in Syria reached 1.6 to 2.3 million, but 420,000 of these people left Syria for Iraq and Turkey as a result of the current conflict. Some Syrian Kurds have lived in Homs and Damascus for hundreds of years. They're heavily assimilated into Syrian society. But Kurdish illegal immigrants who mostly reside in northern Syria and who could not provide residence in Syria before 1945, they complain of oppression because they weren't granted the rights of Syrian citizens. Now, Syrian law dictates that only a blood-born Syrian whose paternal lineage is Syrian has a right to Syrian citizenship. No refugee, whether Somali, Iraqi, or Palestinian, has been granted Syrian citizenship no matter how long their stay. In spite of all of this, in 2011, the Syrian president, Assad, granted Syrian citizenship to 150,000 Kurds. But this hasn't stopped the YPG from using illegal Kurdish immigrants who were not granted citizenship as a rationale for annexing Syrian land. Those who are promoting federalism are imposing the will of a small minority. That's not of Syrian origin, but the minority. It's not Syrian. But they're imposing it on the whole of Al-Hasaka's population and the whole of Syria nonetheless. Now, the PYD didn't bother to consult with other factions of Syrian society before it's made its unilateral declaration of federalism. So the other ethnicities that reside in Al-Hasaka Governorate, which the PYD claims is now an autonomous Kurdish state, have clearly rejected federalism. There was an assembly of Syrian clans and Arab tribes in Al-Hasaka, and the Assyrian Democratic Organization, the ADO, rejected the PYD's federalism declaration. In Geneva, both the Syrian government and the opposition rejected the PYD's federalism declaration. And furthermore, the PYD does not represent all of Syria's Kurdish population. The Kurdish faction of Syrian National Coalition condemned the PYD's federalism declaration. Most of Syria's Kurds do not live in Al-Hasaka, and many that do work outside of it. So thousands of Kurds have joined ISIS, fighting for Islamic State, not a Kurdish one. A unilateral declaration of federalism doesn't carry any legitimacy, since federalism can only exist with a constitutional change and a referendum. Federalism is unlikely to garner much support from the bulk of Syria's population, 90 to 93% of whom is not Kurdish. Knowing this, the PYD has banned residents of al-Hasaka from voting in the upcoming parliamentary elections to be held across the nation. This shows that the will of the people in al-Hasaka is already being crushed by the PYD. It's undemocratic to continue to discuss federalism as a possibility when it's been rejected by so many segments of Syrian society. Ironically, we're told the purpose of the U.S. regime change adventures in Syria is to bring democracy to the Middle East, but this is not democratic at all. Now, the Kurds make up only 7 to 10% of Syria's total population. The PYD, though, is demanding that 20% of Syria's land be given over to them. What's even more is that the region of al-Hasaka, which the YPG wants to annex, has a population of only 1.5 million people. Much of Syria's agricultural and oil wealth is in al-Hasaka. It's shared by Syria's entire population of 23 million. Al-Hasaka, the province, produces 34% of Syria's wheat and much of the oil. And the oil pumping stations that are now being used by ISIS and the YPG Kurds to fund their war efforts and depriving the Syrian people of the oil at the same time. Now, we talk about Syria's starving population, but there's very little talk about how federalizing Syria would actually make this starvation into law for generations to come. Instead, the promoters of federalism talk about how giving the resources shared by 23 million people to 1.5 million will lead to peace in some alternate universe. Since the majority of Syria's population and Syria's government oppose Kurdish annexation claims, the PYD is not going to be able to achieve federalism through legal means. The only way the PYD and the YPG can achieve federalism is through brute force. And this brute force may be backed by the U.S. Air Force, by special forces, whatever. It contradicts international law. The head of the PYD, Saleh Islam, has already threatened to attack Syrian troops if they attempt to take Raqqa from ISIS. A Kurdish state in Syria, just like the Iraqi Kurdistan, would ensure that the United States has hegemony in the region. Like the KRG, we have the YPG already attempting to build a U.S. base on Syrian soil. Russia has obviously been an ally of Syria for a long time, would be isolated as a result, and this would tip the balance of power in the world into the favor of the United States. All of Syria's neighboring countries are also opposed to this ethnocentric Kurdish state in Syria. The YPG is linked to the PKK, which is active in Turkey and which the United Nations has designated a terrorist organization. Turkey will see the YPG's federalism claims as strengthening the PKK, and this Turkey might invade Syria as a result, and they already have, but I'm referring to a much bigger invasion, but this would guarantee at least a regional war if this is an invasion that it becomes bigger and sees a direct conflict between Syria and Turkey. And a regional war, of course, would involve Iran, Hezbollah, and Israel as well, possibly even Jordan and some of the Gulf. Israel wants to establish a Kurdistan, obviously, as a Sunni Iranian rival to Shiite Iran. They hope that a Sunni state will block Iran's access to Syria and also prevent Lebanese resistance against Israeli invasion. This was all outlined in Israel's Yinon plan back in 1982. Of course, Israel is an extension of U.S. influence and hegemony in the region, and obviously holds much sway over the U.S. politics. But this is the new Ulster, the little Jewish Ulster, which Sir Ronald Storrs wrote about in his own biography when they created Israel in order to do exactly what it's doing today. Strengthening Israel in the region, of course, strengthens U.S. influence in the region. It shrinks Russian influence, pushes the nuclear power of Russia into a corner. And journalists who show a sense of confusion about the reason that the West is supporting Kurdish expansionism should consider this point. Now, we also want to look at finally, a designated Kurdish area in Syria is deeply rooted in ethnocentric chauvinism. A U.S. state strictly designated for Hispanics, for instance, or a U.S. state for white people, a U.S. state for black people, all this would be outrageous to suggest. Well, maybe it was outrageous a few years ago. There's a lot of people who wouldn't find it outrageous anymore. But the idea of having a state in the United States is just designated for one race, that would be outrageous, and it would be considered racist by a lot of people. But the use of ethnicity as a means to divide and conquer is the oldest and most cynical form of imperialism. Syria must remain for all Syrians, not just for one minority. Voices who oppose this should be discouraged, should we say. The Syrian constitution should continue to resist all ethnocentric religious-based parties. If there's a change to the Syrian constitution, it should be the removal of the word Arab from Syrian Arab Republic. This is problematic. In spite of the fact that the vast majority of Syrians speak Arabic, the majority of Syrians are not historically or ethnically Arab. There's something else, and that's something that most people don't tend to understand. All sections and segments of Syrian society should be treated equally under the flag, and so we do encourage them to take out the word Arab, but you can scarcely argue with the points that I'm trying to make here. If we go to the question of Kurdish ethnic cleansing campaigns that could be launched against Assyrians and Christians, we have to look at the recent past of the YPG. The Kurdish population, at least since the Kurdish population is not a majority in the areas that the PYD are trying to take over, the past few years have shown that the PYD and the YPG are not beyond carrying out ethnic cleansing of non-Kurdish minorities in an attempt to create a demographic shift. The main threat to Kurdish ethnocentric territorial claims over the areas, the other large minorities, are the Arabs and the Assyrian Christians. Again, Saleh Muslim, who is the leader of the PYD, openly declared his intention to conduct an ethnic cleansing campaign against Syrian Arabs who live in what he calls Rojava. This is what he said in an interview with Sarek TV. One day those Arabs who have been brought to the Kurdish areas will have to be expelled. Can't get much clearer than that. And over 2 years since that interview was done, he has fulfilled his word. The YPG began burning Arab villages around Al-Asaka province, hoping to create this demographic shift. And it's estimated that 10,000 Arabs have been ethnically cleansed from Al-Hasaka province so far. The villages around Tal Abyad have suffered the most egregiously, as the Kurdish expansionists are trying to connect the discontiguous population centers of Al-Asaka and Al-Raqqa. YPG burnt villages, looted houses, and there's all kinds of stuff near the city of Ras Al Ain in December. So these campaigns, the ethnic cleansing campaigns, are not without precedent. The YPG has begun a campaign of intimidation and murder and property confiscation against the Assyrian Christian minority. The YPG and PYD made it a formal policy to loot and confiscate the property of the people who had escaped their villages after an ISIS attack in the hope of repopulating Assyrian villages with Kurds. The Assyrians, or at least the Assyrian residents of the Kabur area in Al-Hasaka province, formed a militia called the Kabur Guard in hope of defending their villages against ISIS attacks. And the Kabur Guard council leaders protested the practice of looting by Kurdish YPG militia members who looted Assyrian villages that were evacuated after ISIS attacked them. And subsequently, the YPG assassinated the leader of the Kabur Guard, David Jindo, and attempted to assassinate Elias Nasser. At first, the YPG blamed the assassination on ISIS, but Nasser, who survived, was able to expose the YPG's involvement from his hospital bed. And since the assassination, the YPG has forced the Kabur Guard to disarm and to accept the YPG protection. And Most residents of the Kabul area who fled to the Syrian army-controlled areas of Kamlishi, but they couldn't return to their villages. The Assyrian Christian community in Kamlishi has also been harassed by the YPG Kurdish militia. The YPG attacked an Assyrian checkpoint that killed one fighter of the Assyrian militia, the Soturo, and wounded 3 others. The checkpoint was set up after 3 Assyrian restaurants were bombed on December 20th in an attack that killed 14 Assyrian civilians. The Assyrians suspected the YPG was behind these bombings in an attempt to assassinate Assyrian leaders and prevent any future claims of control over Kamlishi. It would be foolish to ignore the signs that a more widely spread ethnic cleansing campaign might occur if Kurdish expansionists are supported, especially since other ethnic groups are not on board with their federalism plans. It's only been 90 years since the Assyrian genocide, which was conducted by Turks and Kurds. This history shouldn't be allowed to be repeated, obviously, and Assyrians have enjoyed safety and stability in Syria ever since. Forcing the Assyrians to accept federalization is not going to ensure their safety. Establishment of Kurdish federal state in Iraq has not protected Assyrian villages from attacks by Kurdish armed groups either. The campaign of ethnic cleansing against Assyrians and Arabs in al-Aqsa has already begun, and we should probably expect to see it escalate if the Kurds continue to gain power. Now, I have much more to say about this issue, but we must turn to the domestic front. I want to make sure I have enough time for this. Kratom. We have talked about kratom for quite some time here on this show. And we talked about last week the CDC labeled kratom as an emerging public health threat. And we knew right then that the fight was on for the ability to use and obtain and possess and consume kratom. We did not expect them to move this fast, though, because the notoriously fascistic U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA, has now filed a notice of intent to not only list kratom as a controlled substance, but is planning to add it to Schedule 1, which is the most restrictive classification possible. For those of you who don't know, kratom is also known as Mitragyna speciosa. It's 2 primary constituents, mitragynyne and 7-hydroxymitragynyne. Those are going to be placed on Schedule 1 temporarily beginning on September 30th. The information is coming from a filing from the DEA on August 30th, but the full announcement is scheduled to be published in the Federal Register now. It should be up there now, actually. Kratom is not an opiate, but it does function in a similar manner. It attaches to activating opiate receptors. It's been shown to alleviate chronic pain, anxiety, as well as aiding in overcoming addiction and depression. And studies in mice have actually demonstrated impressive results in overcoming addiction to cocaine. A lot of people who use it have said that it's helped them get off of heroin. It's an excellent substitute for prescription pain medication as well as addiction that comes with that. The DEA made its move after a few states toyed with the idea of placing kratom on their own controlled substances list statewide, but failed to do so after public outcry. Never known for its attention to democracy or individual liberty or individual choice, the DEA is simply doing on a national level what big pharma and big government couldn't do on a state level. So it's absolutely astounding, even for the DEA, that kratom is now listed alongside heroin. According to the DEA, kratom has no known medical use and a high abuse potential. So with the swipe of a pen, the DEA has driven the final nail into what little credibility it had left and might be the only bright spot in the whole situation. But on the other hand, it's doomed many Americans to live in pain and anxiety and forced many more back into the arms of Big Pharma. Perhaps that's the only reason that the DEA made this decision to begin with. Now, let's talk for a minute, because we do have some time to do this, about the DEA. The Drug Enforcement Agency has long targeted Americans with the most nonsensical and ridiculous type of propaganda in order to convince them that the agency itself is actually useful. and not actually the scourge of civilized nation that it truly is. After all, if you're going to continue to launch a full-on military operation and establish a police state against adults who choose to consume specific plants and throw otherwise peaceful people into cages and ruin their lives, even killing them in the process, you got to have some rather extreme and immediate reason to continue to exist. And for this reason, the DEA, in addition to the fleets of aircraft and military uniforms, machine guns, and other forms of war gear, they've been funded liberally for over 40 years for the purpose of waging war against the same taxpayers who are then forced to fund it. But in addition to the hardware, the DEA is also tasked with convincing Americans that the drug war is just and that it must be won, much less waged. So the DEA needs to justify its continued robbing and pillaging and killing of American citizens to the same American citizens that the DEA will rob, pillage, and kill. As a result, we see the most ridiculous types of propaganda, from deformed, boneless teenagers, which of course was caused by marijuana, to zombies, caused again by marijuana, and even the drunken businessman who inadvertently funds Al-Qaeda by buying weed at this swanky nightclub. We're constantly reminded that a world in which adults can freely choose what they put into their own bodies is just a step in the direction of a world of crack-smoking toddlers and elementary schools full of heroin addicts and puppies tripping on acid. We get it. We get it. If we don't have a paramilitary police force doing everything we were told only anti-American tyrants do overseas, the world would come to a fiery end. But what if everything, or at least the majority of it, that the DEA has fed to us in a decades-long existence is just simply bullshit? What if marijuana isn't the same as heroin? What if kratom is not the same as marijuana or heroin? What if, in a free society, adults do have the right to take LSD if they want? What if the United States didn't waste so much money on preventing allegedly free adults from consuming substance they obviously want to consume? What if the United States didn't waste incredible fortunes on the prison industrial complex and putting non-violent people behind bars? What if the United States did not have the highest incarceration rate in the world while still lecturing other countries on freedom and democracy overseas? Another question is why the DEA even exists to begin with. While the debate over whether some drugs or substances, plants, etc. are helpful or harmful or addictive, that debate can certainly be had, but the question of whether or not an adult has the right to consume those substances or plants should never be up for debate. But since its official creation in 1972, all the way up to 2014, the DEA has sucked up over $50 billion in taxpayer money. The estimated budget of the DEA hovers around $3 billion per year. And that's just merely for one small portion of this overarching war, which is not counting the resources of federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies that are devoted to locking up nonviolent plant and substance possessors, as well as the staggering cost of incarcerating these people, which is about a $51 billion per year price tag. Over a decade, this money that's been used to incarcerate human beings for alleged crimes that harm nobody except arguably themselves balloons to over $500 billion in a decade. To put that in context, the LA Times reports that the cost of ending worldwide hunger would be $300 billion. In other words, if the U.S. alone would just simply end its persecution of plants and persecution of nonviolent people for 10 years, it could end world hunger while still keeping all other programs and spending plans in place. That America could end world hunger but chooses instead to stick to a punitive system of locking up nonviolent human beings into cages is a stunning condemnation of the priorities of this alleged freest country in the world. The United States now has the largest population of incarcerated people in the entire world. Maybe that's why we're constantly reminded by our media and government that the U.S. is the freest country in the world. But you have to ask yourself, how free are you if you have to be reminded of your freedom every hour, otherwise you would forget it? Constant repetition of your superiority is not a hallmark of freedom, it's a hallmark of slavery and totalitarianism. From year to year, American political debates center around spending and spending cuts, and law enforcement and overseas wars never receive cuts in funding, but Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP benefits, veteran services, those are all routinely reduced. If there was ever a case for abolishing a useless and counterproductive government agency, the DEA has certainly made one for itself. If America ever wants to move forward as a nation, it has to abandon this incredibly corrupt, violent, and counterproductive war on drugs. The DEA must be abolished. The prison industrial complex must be broken. Americans can no longer afford to waste their money, their society, and their lives for the benefit of the private prison industry or big pharma or big industry or Wall Street. It has to end now. Now, in the last few minutes, I want to go over what you can do, because I should have done that before I got into the rant. But what we need to do is, this is an action alert, and please go to my website. It says, search this, Action Alert, August 31st, 16. So 8-31-16, 8/31/16. Help stop the DEA's attack on Kratom. So Action Alert, 8/31/16, August 31st, 2016. Help stop the DEA's attack on Kratom. You can find it. It was posted on August 31st, or you can search it. And this has got all the information you need to know. We're going to add to it. We're going to post another action alert soon, so you should be able to find that on the homepage. But here are the steps that you need to do. First, very basic. I'm calling on everybody to do all of these things. The first thing is, go support the American Kratom Association in this upcoming legal battle for civil liberties and health freedom. Right? So the American Kratom Association is going to be lobbying. They're going to hire a lawyer, and they're going to fight this thing. This is the spearhead in this whole fight, the American Kratom Association. Go to AmericanKratom.org and check out their website. Find the American Kratom Association on Facebook. Now, here's what we're asking you to do. The American Kratom Association needs to hire a public relations firm and a lawyer. Go to AmericanKratom.org/donate and donate there, whatever you can. Also, if you have a PayPal account, you can get them at akratomassociation@gmail.com and donate that way. That's akratomassociation@gmail.com. Then, again, you need to pull up the action alert so you can get the link. But there's a petition, one of the whitehouse.gov petitions, that you can sign. It's very easy. Go do it. Now, we also have a march that is being scheduled. Tuesday, September 13th, there is going to be a co-sponsored peaceful protest and march at the White House. The White House, they're in Washington, D.C. Go to the website, kratommarchdc.com. kratommarchdc.com. And there's a Facebook event, Kratom March DC. You can find them there as well and join the event. Please, if you're able, join this protest march at the White House. Now, we also want you to contact your congressperson. If you need to find your congressperson, and you're a regular listener to this show, you should know how to do that, and you should know who it is. But if you don't, http://www.house.gov/representatives/find/. That's how you find your representative. You could do the same thing for senators. Contact your senator, http://www.senate.gov/senators/contact/. So we want you to contact your congressmen, contact your senators, email, telephone, both. Send them a message and tell them to get involved here. stop the DEA from banning this. And we'll give you an idea of what to write soon, in just a few minutes, in just a minute or two. We also want you to email the Assistant Secretary of Health, Karen B. DeSalvo. Her email, ash@hhs.gov. And all this is going to be in the old action alert and the new one. Call the DEA, 202-307-1000. 202-307-1000. Ask for Melvin Patterson and press number 4 to share your story. 202-307-1000. You can donate again to the American Kratom Association. There is a fact sheet at the American Kratom Association website that you can download and hand out. There is a Facebook program, Keep Kratom Legal. Go like that. That is the hashtag #IamKratom. You start using that on Twitter, hashtag #IamKratom. Join the Facebook photo campaign. And, of course, there's going to be a sample article, a sample email that you can send to all of your representatives. Now, we've also got a list of other individuals, the Office of Legal Affairs, the U.S. Department of Justice, all these people to contact and send information out to. If you're a writer, please write relevant content regarding kratom, kratom freedom, all this, post this material to your website. Or if you don't have a website, send it to me, anticodex@yahoo.com. Write an article to your local newspaper. Contact your local news media. Be willing to tell your story. Be willing to write a letter to the editor. We want you to act as a liaison between pro-kratom organizations, anti-drug war organizations, pro-legalization organizations, all these groups that simply support individual choice, pro-kratom, pro-weed, whatever, in order to create a united front against this latest move by the DEA. We need all hands on deck for this. This is extremely important that you guys get involved here. And again, I've got an action alert up on August 31st. Today is September 5th, and the show is being recorded on the 4th. So by the time you hear the show, we should have another action alert up that's even more comprehensive with more things for you to do. So please pay attention to that and get involved in the fight, ladies and gentlemen. This is where the rubber meets the road. I also want you to get my article. It's time to abolish the DEA and share that far and wide, but we need everybody on deck. We've already forced this into the mainstream media. When we first started talking about kratom, it was only natural health websites, alternative health websites, alternative media. We forced this issue into the mainstream. The Huffington Post and Forbes magazine, Heavy.com, all of this stuff, all these mainstream outlets are now talking about kratom, and they're actually on our side here. So we've got to take advantage of that, and this reveals our power now that we've been able to push this into the mainstream. So please go to BrandonTurbeville.com, get August 31st and the September 5th action alert, and do everything on that list. Make it a checklist, and you can consider yourself having done your part. If you do all of that, then you have done yourself and your country and everybody around you a great service, because this is important. A lot of people are depending on your action. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.
Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.tv.